according to leaked interviews with Russian POWs, Russian command in Kursk dipped out at the first sign of trouble. But that's not all that we've learned about the sad state of the Russian military in Kursk. We're going to break down this whole thing and what it means for old Vladimir Putin and the Russian public. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay. This is a really interesting story from the Kiev Independent, right? They were granted access to Russian POWs who were captured in Kursk Oblast, right? And some of the stories these guys tell are absolutely preposterous, right? But I actually am inclined to believe them. And we're going to take a look at why. So when we look through, they interviewed, what's interesting, a mix of conscripts and contract soldiers, right? 2 conscripts and 1 contract soldier were actually willing to talk to the press. And it makes sense, right, that so few would want to, given that in Russia, just talking to in public in a negative way about the war is literally illegal in Russia. So the fact is that if you're held as a POW, even objectively describing what happened to you is going to be seen as being anti-war. I mean, you literally, the official stance of the Russian military is that Russia is just strong, getting stronger and going from victory to victory. So how then could these conscripts and contract soldiers then be held in Ukrainian custody? Right? They profile one 20-year-old who says, in classic 20-year-old fashion, he had no idea anything about the war before his service. And of course, he said, I saw it on the internet. I came across it, but I didn't delve into the details. It was just that our army was doing good. That's all he saw. And trust me, we've all been 20. Yeah, your whole world is girls and cars, right? Or I don't know what you do in Russia. Vodka and girls, vodka and cigarettes. I don't know. But the point is that he really just thought that when his summons for mandatory military service came, he said, listen, the Russian government says I won't be involved in combat. And he said, I don't want to get into military action. I just want to serve for a year and return home to my family and loved ones. The other one was a 22-year-old former engineering student who failed out of his engineering school and therefore lost his deference, and therefore had to sign up as a conscript, right? And so, no longer exempt from military service, he was quickly drafted. And he said both of them actually reported being very nervous when they received word that they were going to be deployed to the border. But as the Kiev Independent points out, hundreds of professional troops are sent to fight inside Ukraine. Right? That's where the contract soldiers, who are generally older, they're generally better trained, they are the ones sent to do the actual nitty-gritty fighting, sometimes on sort of sometimes they are somewhat deceived by recruiters. But these 19 or 20-year-olds, they are told that under Russian law, they won't be doing any fighting. But as we point out in this channel, that when you have this tremendous need for manpower in Ukraine, you take whatever you can get to fulfill the rest of the roles, freeing up professional soldiers for their meat assaults in Donbass, basically. And in this case, that means conscripts were sitting on the border, guarding the border against Ukrainian advances. And so these 19 and 22-year-olds, or 20 and 22-year-olds, said that on August 6th, about 4 a.m., their outpost was hit by 3 HIMARS rockets, one after the other. They said one hit a command center, killing 2 conscripts and 2 officers. Another rocket landed closer to their position, collapsing it partially, meaning it was unable to be used for anything. They had no communication and no power. Of course, their commanders, this is my favorite part, they said, yeah, 2 officers have been killed. He said, we didn't see our commanders. They just disappeared after lunch. So literally, they got hit with HIMARS rockets. Their commanders went off to lunch and then just no-showed. They literally went out for cigarettes and didn't come back, leaving these conscripts to do whatever the hell they could do. They said, we decided it was time to head to Suja because we were told by whom, not their commander, because there were rumors that they were evacuating conscripts from Suja. Again, so then they just sort of started walking. walking through a bunch of fields, ran into Ukrainian soldiers, and they promptly surrendered, right? They said they promised not to harm us. We believed them because they had numerical superiority, and no one wanted to die for the commanders who abandoned us. But in Dennis's case, in the other conscript's case, his unit commander actually did stick around. Not because they're a great guy, but because they too wanted to stay alive. They also gave up almost immediately and didn't fight at all. Retreating through swamps to a town near Suja, holed up in a house. The next morning, the sentry woke everyone up and said that there were Ukrainian soldiers nearby. But when Dennis looked to his commander for guidance, he saw that half of them had left during the night. So now, undermanned, they immediately surrendered to the Ukrainian soldiers who, as they said, would just throw grenades at us or shoot us all. Ukrainian soldiers climbed through the house through a window and they shouted we were conscripts and that we were surrendering. So both conscripts report that their commanders totally abandoned them, which is just classic. Again, we've talked about the fact that the Russian officer corps, first off, is notoriously corrupt. And you have to think about the level of corruption, first off, to get you a posting away from the front line in Ukraine. Probably means that your motivation is not defending your country or serving it or anything like that. Your motivation is to collect that sweet officer paycheck and stay in a role where the chances of something bad happening to you are absolutely minimal. And that's what it sounds like these officers did. The twisted part, the sad part, is that in both cases, the officers that abandoned their troops had literally no reason to do so because those troops actually managed to survive and end up as POWs. Whereas there seems to be a pretty good chance that those troops that did try to flee, those officers that did try to flee, likely or more likely to have gotten caught in a Ukrainian strike of some kind, or if they did encounter the Russian military, they would be forced back into the fighting. And God help you, if you're an officer who retreated in the face of enemy soldiers, we've seen that their fates tend to be pretty grisly. So, in fact, it's the 19-year-olds who didn't want to be there who ended up coming out on top in all likelihood. But here's where things get more interesting. Right? We are going to talk about the contract soldier. And you can see the difference here. This is the contract soldier. This dude looks like he's in his late 30s, early 40s. In contrast to this kid and this kid. These are kids, man. And this guy is a grown-ass man. Right? They say visibly decades older than their conscript cellmates. Contract soldiers are generally less keen to engage in eye contact, let alone conversation. This guy, 42 years old, Vitaly Chugovsky, right, from Novgorod Oblast, said that he was drawn in by money. And who doesn't want to pay? Also, I want to point out, look at this dude. Look at this contract soldier. Again, dude in his 40s said he wanted to be a contract soldier. He says, quote, I never want to be part of this conflict. I didn't enlist to fight. I wanted a job. He said, quote, I love this. This is one of my favorite parts. I watched a lot of videos on YouTube that said the war would end in the fall, that it would be over by November. Oh, guys, listen. This is one of my gripes, is that for every video I put out that makes honest, objective assessments about the war, right, that makes honest forecasts about what I think is going to happen, there's 10, 15 shills out there saying the absolutely most brain-dead takes on God's earth, right? I'm not out here sitting there telling you the war's going to be over in 6 months. Like, maybe, but probably not, right? So I tell people, the Korean War, they spent 4 years in a stalemate negotiating. So, and we haven't even started negotiations in this conflict. So anybody that tells you the war is going to be over, just like when it started, right? What did I say on this channel? Did I say this was going to be World War III? No, of course not, right? But look at how many other idiot commentators did. They were like, oh, it's World War III's coming, guys. No, it's not. Remained a brutal, but firmly regional conflict. Like there are many allies on each side, but the actual fighting is contained to Ukraine and now a small portion of Russia. What I thought was most interesting about the story about this contract soldier is that he deliberately traveled hours to St. Petersburg because their government, the city, was actually offering additional bonuses for signing up in St. Petersburg. And all in, This contract soldier thought his first paycheck, he was expecting to receive 14 grand. How do you think that feels if you're a poor, uneducated Russian and you get a check for 14 grand? That's like in the United States getting a first paycheck of like 50 racks. Okay? That is something that is motivating. This guy says, I didn't enlist to fight. I just wanted a job. They said they promised me a job as a driver, he says. Right? He thought his various health problems would save him from being sent to what they call the 0 line, 0 meters away from the enemy. And he said, the first day at the training center, I realized I wasn't going to be a driver, that I would be an assault soldier, right? He was captured about a week after the conscripts as his unit was thrown into battle with no preparation in an unsuccessful attempt to stop the Ukrainian advance. We kept hearing mortar fire, tried to hold our position. Eventually, we were ordered to retreat. During the retreat, we got separated, and it became every man for himself as the commanders dipped, got lost, ran out of food and water, surrendered to the Ukrainians. The end. Now, here's the thing. Right? The Russians are really keen to get their conscripts back. Why? Because it's really embarrassing. They were never supposed to be fighting in the first place. So immediately they traded 115 conscripts for 115 Ukrainian POWs, including several that had been held since 2022. And of course, the contract soldier is saying that, you know, the war is not that popular in Russia. We're going to talk a little bit about just what we mean by that. And if Russians are finally actually getting sick of the war. Certainly I would be hearing stories like this. But first, let's talk about Labor Day. Guys, it's Labor Day weekend. Summer drawn to a close. That means you got to get ready. Get back to work. Starting school. Getting ready for the holidays. And that means we got a Labor Day sale for you on strikegum.com. Link is in the description. Use code LaborDay24. Get free shipping on all orders over $50 if you're in the US, and 20% off if you're shipping internationally. What does that mean? That means you buy the 2 of the 5 packs, guys. Get your free shipping, and it gives you the equivalent of 25 energy drinks. That's how much is in here. 90 milligrams of caffeine, 0 sugar, made in the USA, veteran owned. If you're somebody who spent $5 a pop hauling around a can of energy drinks, right? Good luck. Good luck if you work in a trade. Good luck if you're a cop or a nurse or just a parent, right? You got to have your hands free. That's what Strike Gum does. You get all the caffeine of an energy drink, none of the sugar. So check it out at strikegum.com. Oh, and by the way, that promo code, LaborDay24, you can also use it on Combat Vet News. That's right, 10 to 20% off of memberships. So if you were thinking about supporting the channel and getting access to uncensored combat footage, including some of these conscripts fighting, you want to use promo code LaborDay24 and get that 10 to 20% off, right? Obviously, more off, higher up the tiers. But thanks to all you guys that support me. This is the best way to support the channel. Now, the link to that's in the description as well. Okay, let's talk about Russia's own polls. Now, I want you to understand here, polling in Russia is a little different, right? Because they're state-owned polling agency. And the state-owned polling agencies, their problem is they're state-owned. So this is the equivalent of a cop knocking on your door and being like, hey, we want to know how you think your local law enforcement's doing. Are you going to tell them that you think they're giving out speeding tickets over some BS? Are you going to really tell that cop at your door that you think that, they ticketed your neighbor for, some dumb stuff, right? Or that their dogs were jerks to you, right? You getting to tell them that? No, of course not. The fact that there's an uptick at all in Russian perceptions and attitudes towards Putin and the Russian authorities is itself kind of insane. 28% of respondents, according to the state-owned polling agency, expressed outrage or dissatisfactions with the action of Russian authorities over the past month. Yeah, wow. That's almost 1 in 3. That's nearly 1 in 3 Russians. Right? It was just 18% just 3 weeks ago. And this is a sign, again, what happened? What changed? Well, the answer is Russia lost a portion of its territory. And this is the highest level of dissatisfaction since November of 2022, which you may recall the first month of that deeply unpopular mobilization. So Russians are as angry today as they were when they were being mobilized en masse, and there was huge brain drain, tons of fleeing of the Russian from Russia. Right? And Putin had to, that policy was so unpopular, Putin had to walk it back. The problem is Putin can just walk back a mobilization policy, but Putin's got to really pull out the stops to get back Kursk. Putin's own approval rating fell by 3.5% to a paltry 73%. This is, again, a record fall in Putin's approval rating. And the fact that, again, 1 in 3 is what? 1 in 30? 1 in 30 Russians are now willing to admit to a state polling agency that they think Putin can go fuck himself is actually pretty astounding. Right? Again, as they point out, these polls from Russian state-owned polling agencies are not particularly profound discontent, and shouldn't be seen as scientifically reliable of people's actual opinions. But remember, their opinions barely matter because they don't vote. Right? So the only people that Putin is worried about are the people who are willing to do things that are more serious than voting. Because remember, if you can't change your government at the ballot box, you can change it by the gun barrel, the Prigozhin method. And when you have a society that's increasingly militarized as Russia is, right? The more veterans you have that know how the guns work, that know how to drop a drone on someone they don't like, the more these 25% of very serious and I don't give a fuck attitude. These Russians, that 25% or whatever, they worry Putin. So again, what does this mean? This means for Putin, he's got to get Kursk Oblast back if he wants to at least restore some level of prestige. But again, right now, he's not doing it. Ukrainians are holding Kursk and continuing to advance. So he's got to find another solution. Please be sure to subscribe, guys. And a huge thank you to our Colonel tier members, particularly Bill Collier, Robin Colburn, Gaius Marnie, Eugenia Cuesta, Chris Gorsuch, Francis and AL90, as well as all of the Lieutenant tier members. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. I could not do it without you. And be sure, again, to subscribe. It's free, and it tells the YouTube algorithm that I'm not one of those dirtbag shill channels. Appreciate you so much. See ya. Cheers.